What's up, everybody? My name is Kalen. I am the Key Keeper, and we are back with another episode of At Pure Keys Lake, where the entire goal is just foaming around the ocean of archetypes, be they castrated and seminally floating like the foam that coagulated into the beautiful Aphrodite. Some way, somehow, our subconscious holds the wisdom. It holds the entire matrix of connection. Water has memory. Olaf said it, guys. So we are just trying to work with the associations that come up naturally. We're trying to blend different esoteric notions, ciphers, ideas, myths, scientifically, fantastically, everything in between. So that's what we are doing, and tonight we are going to try and break the mold a little bit more. I overlaid Formscape's cipher with a Scorpio Rising chart and just looking at what came up. Once again, the cipher just intuitively made sense. And I think why these things can make sense like that is because it's all one thing that's developing. My astrologer also in his natal chart synthesis teaches that consciousness is that which becomes through the narratives of the person who recognizes the I am of themselves. So either way, the 0 degree point of Aries, wherever it is in your chart, whether it's at your 5th house cusp or whatever it is, whole signs, not whole signs, it doesn't really matter, but the 0 degrees of Aries represents a rebirth or the start of something, the birth point of something, right ascension of meridian, so any point in the cipher that is technically the first house or the first right angle, that is Aries. And from that perspective, I kind of just want to go through this Scorpio rising chart, knowing that we see the planets Sun, Mars, Pluto, Ketu, Saturn, Jupiter, Moon, Mercury, Neptune, Rahu, Uranus, Venus in this 12-fold cycle. So beginning with Scorpio in the ascendant, we see the Sun there. Now, what this makes me think of is the fact that the Pi team said the Sun was born of Vishaka. And it also makes me think of what my astrologer said about Leo to Scorpio being the fixed modality as a developmental process in not only attenuating the ego, Leo through Virgo, but that ego having the necessity to merge with another, which is the work of Libra into Scorpio, that process by which the bliss of the Sagittarian expansive orgasmic experience is attained by having Scorpio settled through the 12th aspect of yourself. It is ultimately that which weathers the Sagittarius ascendant into creating the meaning of life from such a pure fundamental level that they can build the edifice and the material success that manifests through the 2nd house and the value of Capricorn. So it's interesting that the Sun could be born in Scorpio, and the Son of the Sun is the 2nd house, and it's Mars. And we know Mars and Aries and the Sun's exaltation does have an esoteric resonance. But seeing Mars in Sagittarius here in the second house, it does also take me back to the Thunderbolts project and the Veilikofsky alignment, which birthed Mars out of, being this apple of Saturn's eye in the Sekhmet Ra notion of the Divine Mother Child, Isis, Horus, Mars and Venus, which was a polar alignment within the monadic structure of Saturn as a pole star, if Veilikofsky is to be believed. So just seeing Mars, everything we know about Mars as a phallic principle, but also Mars as a spiritually piercing principle. We see the circle and the spear here. That's very Sagittarius. It's very virile member. It's very semen. It's very erection. It's very Alpha Centauri, Galactic Center, Serpentarius, Ophiuchus. And just the whole idea that the sun should impregnate the earth, and Sagittarius esoterically being an earth sign. And we know that through KRS channel there's a lot about third away, fourth away, sixth away, seventh from, eighth from, 12th from, like there's a lot of numerological value that the angles provide. So the fact that Mars is second from the sun, and the fact that Mars and Sagittarius does have a phallic penetrative connotation, which the way the Mars principle is said to be the executive will of the sun. The sun is like a king and the commander-in-chief and the leader. Mars is the soldier and the executioner, the foot soldier, the spy, the feeler, the seeker. And those energies are very Sagittarius, quite psychosexually actually, because just feeling around in that dark space, it does require a certain firmness, a certain strength, endurance, and a certain seeking, and just everything that we've learned about just the psychosexual nature of the hippocampus and the pineal gland, and the whole way that your body experiences the chemistry of your spiritual bliss, right? Mars is very much linked to just the whole tapasya of using Rajasic energy to break up tamas into sattvas, and that's also very Sagittarius because its motto is I see. And the arrow of Sagittarius gets a very pointed focus in the notion that Mars, second house Sagittarius, actually points to Mercury, Gemini, the lovers in the 8th house, which is interesting because the whole Aditi Nariti split is a twin flame of Sagittarius's Mula and Jeshta, which once again somehow the cipher just kind of like makes sense that Mars could rule Sagittarius in that way. Because we know the Sagittarius principle, what it would value, its intellectual pursuit, its pleasure pursuit, its value screening process, its tastes. It would be very Martian influence, not only because it has Scorpio in the 12th, but Mars would exalt in the second house in Capricorn naturally. So Mars and Sagittarius does have a very strange resonance that I just intuitively feel holds true. But as I was saying, what we have been learning about the trifold light and us as projectors and reflectors of that light, everything kind of like comes to a single pointed focus anyway with IC. So, and just the fact that the psychological root of the chart is the base and it says IC, whereas the esoteric chart puts the I to the Gemini Cancer cusp opposed to the 0 point of Uttar Ashada, cusping Sag into Capricorn, a sun-ruled nakshatra, also connotating to Abhijit, Ophiuchus, the hidden 13th sign, and the 28th nakshatra stepping off the plane of the ecliptic, which is interesting because formlessness and Ketu, and the way that the sun spends less time in Scorpio and actually more time in Ophiuchus above the ecliptical range that we would kind of like expected. It's very interesting how Ketu exalts the sun, and that the sun is birthed in the ascendant through Scorpio. It's very root meets crown, yin meets yang, Isis meets Osiris, and everything that the galactic center, anti-center, Apollo, Artemis, electromagnetism of the trifold light has been telling us. The black-white split of the equal signs in the middle, the Mars in the second house and its proximities to these other signs. It just does bring me also back to what Greenstone Lobo said. He took Venus away from Taurus. He still exalted the moon there, and he gave it to planet X, which is very interesting. Planet X is Cubera, and that is the god of wealth, which also gets a very Hades connotation. And we know that there is an Asterian nakshatra called Hades in Taurus. And even just the fact that, when you look on the chart for Taurus, Critica is a knife, which is very interesting because I think Critica is a sun-ruled nakshatra. And we see here the glyph of Taurus looks like the Mercury glyph, and just the way the crescent of the moon cuts the light of the sun. It's very interesting. It's like I don't really know what it means here, to be honest, but I'm just trying to go with what's coming forward. So for Capricorn and the third house, we see Pluto, which is really interesting because, for example, the Shravana nakshatra has an arrow and the Dhanishta nakshatra has a cup. So everything we've been talking about, like just the most famous, Ganymede, Uranus, Castrati, I think it's just the fact that I have Uranus in Capricorn that I just need to see this sextile that I have between my Pluto and Uranus. But Pluto in Capricorn, I do believe I've heard a notion of either Lilith or the dark moon or the void of course moon or the new moon, the moon in detriment or the Hades moon ruling Capricorn, which, Pluto as a underworld, upperworld correspondent to Mercury, which we know in this cipher, Pluto is opposite Neptune, but in Slick Dissident cipher, Neptune is Dionysus and it's a 3. So it's just very interesting, the semen, the intoxication, the goat symbolism, the devil symbolism, the inverted Christ symbolism insofar as Pluto with its glyph looking like it's holding up some sort of heavenly sphere like Atlas. The fact that Neptune brought Pluto in to stabilize the orbits ex post facto, the Veilikofsky cosmogenesis of planetary billiard balls. So very like that Ice Age movie right now. So yeah, it's interesting. Also just the whole ascent of the Makara and Pluto bringing things from the underworld, the buried girl Persephone bringing the Assyrian corn and cornucopias and plenty from the earth. Capricorn as a mermaid, as a Persephone buried girl, and Capricorn as a Ganymede, as a seminal Christed, initiated cupbearer of the gods. So yeah, just even the fact that we know that the goat is very prominent in fertility symbolism, and the fact that the bottom half is like hybrided with a fish. It's very Maliocene, and it's very everything that we have been trying to say. And even just the whole idea of water spirits and the chimeric notion of that, and Pluto in the underworld and the unconscious, and how things kind of like come from the abyss. It's very Apollonian, light in the scary image of what you think Lucifer is, I guess. But it's like the truth bringer, it's the messenger of the gods. It is the idea of actual Mercury, because as yin, as Ashlesha, from that Keturian realm of darkness, it is the Kundalini serpent rising, and Capricorn is that climb of the Christos. So yeah, and then holding that sphere up on high. It's very Atlas, it's very Ganymede, and it's very Christ, because he upholds the law of heaven by sitting on the, rightful place as God's right hand and all of those things. So it's just a very interesting picture. Aquarius in the fourth, the IC space, the psychological root space, the space of inertia, the waters of life, the Shaktis germinating, the Kundalini churning. That's very electro Aquarius, Uranus fire from the deep Promethean bolts. And we see, for example, Dinishta. Wow, Dinishta is the cupbearer. That's the Aquarius Capricorn cusp. So interesting that the most famous are cupbearers. Wow. Shatabisha is, I believe it's a lotus flower. I think I know Shatabisha also relates to like 1,000 eyes. So it's probably a more illustrious flower than the lotus. I think the lotus is Anuradha, which is also like a narcissus flower and a hyacinth. So it's interesting that the narcissus flower and the Anuradha and the sun, and just like the whole flower of life from the Matrix, which has been demonized through the split of Libra into Scorpio, and like as the destructive aspect of Aditi through Niriti, Mula, Jeshta, all of that. So it's interesting that Aquarius and what we know about like the waters above and the waters below, the fact that Leo forms the waters above, it's very celestial, light river coming into the earth through formlessness and then ascending back. So just everything that Leo as a projection of Aquarius and that outpour of the light would be from the darkness. I see the psychological germination process of that as well. So Saturn and Pisces in the fifth house is very interesting because Saturn, I do believe the Pi team said Saturn was born of Revati, which is so interesting when you think of all the structure and form related to Saturn and the idea of constriction, because Mercury in its final form, Revati, is so yin that it can actually be yang. I don't know, watch Clay Nakti's video about that. So just that flip of Saturn as something not movable or frozen or something cold and connected. And meanwhile it is anything but. It's very mutable. It's very like you see the frame by frame of every reverberation, the way water and Pisces and the fact that Saturn as just an air element, or the significator of air in an inert sense for Aquarius rather, it's just making me think of like thought bubbles in the cosmic ocean, and just like how the heart springs and constantly is building with the waters of life. It's constantly working with that prima mobile of the plastic substance and forming, like Leo is the ego, right? And it's the quote-unquote self-begotten. So Saturn has had that connotation as well. So just the fact that it comes out of Pisces, which in many cases Virgo Pisces are like the oldest signs. But as it relates here to the fifth house aspect and coming out of formlessness, it's very much giving me also the birth of our archetypes as per our recollection out of the exodus of Eden, the end of the golden age, the Atlantean floods and all of that, which I do believe they said that the floodgates opened through Scorpio, which is interesting because it would have poured in a new balance of Libra Venus through the 12th. I don't know what that means. Jupiter in the 6th house in Aries. Jupiter and Amun-Ra and Aries. There's definitely an association, and also that 6, everything we've been saying about the payout, the serpent symbolism, where the S plotted on the cipher, and where the S was split through the T from the U, it was the Scorpio. Saturn split from the moon Libra, or the Saturn Scorpio split, that was W, from the Libra Jupiter split, which was U. I'll just have to check that again. Let me not conflate things right now. Yeah, the U is Jupiter, and it's the cusp of Libra and Virgo. Virgo going into Libra, or Libra going into Virgo, UVW, yeah. Libra going into Virgo. So you going into Virgo is a Jupiterian into Scorpio process. So even that Mars and that penetrating and that things that we said, Jupiter's expansion. So yeah, into the V. X marks the spot, Saturn, Scorpio. Yeah, it's just very interesting notions that I think comes up probably because I have Mars in Virgo and I'm a Mars in Virgo. So just I think very sapiosexually sometimes. And to continue, we see the moon and Taurus and the seventh house. I think that just makes a lot of sense. The Taurus field, the moon, everything we've been saying about Aphrodite as the moon, and therefore bringing the features of Aphrodite and just the mother goddess symbolism to the moon, because I feel like sometimes the moon has been kind of like demonized through the dark side, or it's been vulcanized through the Chitrakat of, the Soma, Mars, Mrigashira out of the Rani, and the Chitra out of Hasta, and the Dhanishta out of Shravana. So yeah, I just think that Taurus and the moon and the seventh house and even the glyph, like it has the crescent, right? So the moon being kind of like connected to the sun, and always like its crescent is always relevant to its aspect received from the sun, otherwise it is like unseen. So yeah, just the fact that Mercury and that glyph then represents the eighth house, Gemini, the everything that we said about the eye, and the fact that the eighth house is erosive of invisibility, because the sunset and the descendant would denote invisibility or disappearing of sight, loss of sight, and the eighth house has its signification in relation to that by being erosive to those qualities, or like the signs are always progressions of each other, so every sign compensates for the overabundance of the previous sign, and it lacks the following sign, or it feels the next sign kind of like there's a void or pull or goal to achieve. So that being said, Mercury, Gemini, the eighth house, the lovers, all of that just makes 100% sense to me. Neptune, Cancer, the ninth house, everything we've been saying about Sag, everything we've been saying about Cancer, water, even like Purva Shada in Sag is Ketu, which is interesting because Ketu is born in Ashlesha in Cancer, which also like it's a Naga ruled nakshatra, but like as Mercury ruled nakshatras like Jeshta and Revati all follow Saturn ruled nakshatras, everything that we've kind of like been relating to like the mermaid symbolism and the serpent of the deep symbolism and the rainbow serpent symbolism, because like the Pushya summer solstice point exalting Jupiter in the Leo Navamsha Pada would peak above the Taurus of that cipher that we showed in Cancer, right? So yeah, and Cancer has a lot to do with form, the moon form. So Neptune getting a very formalistic application through Cancer, because it is constantly like it's like creating pearls or creating sea glass or creating shells in the spirals and swirls and patterns of life. And everything I've been describing about my Venus in Cancer process, which is this patterning. Check out my Homo Solaris video for more on that. So everything that we know about Isis and everything we know about the Kabbalistic tree of life having the crown for Neptune, and what we know about Cancer as an exaltation point for Jupiter and Digbala for Venus, and the height of the summer solstice and containing Artemis in the form of Punarvasu Nakshatra, Artemis also being the mother of the gods. It's giving very space mother, watery mother, inky. Like there's just a lot of like things that Neptune, because it's so elusive, it kind of like merges itself to so many things that just become elusive. But it's also interesting that it ushers in form and the cusp of Leo, and the fact that light and form and the white black split of that, and the red shift, blue shift, green shift, purple shift of that, yeah, it's very interesting. For example, we see the second house is blue meets yellowish, and the fifth house is magenta meets green. And it's also very interesting. I like the green and the purple and the turquoise and the indigo. Like, it's just very interesting how these colors kind of like came over each other as well. I don't really know what it means yet right now. I'm just trying to capture my thoughts as they are coming. The eye of my name, the Jedi hook. So, yeah, like Leo, water, what Formscapes asked about, like Saturn, fire, water, Mercury. It's very interesting because the eye and Gemini and those associations would now fall to Leo, and we saw on that other cipher that the fire air pair of Gemini and Leo does yoke the serpent of the deep or of noon with the rainbow serpent in its precessed cycle, just as Taurus and Cancer yoke the bullseye of that. So yeah, I don't know the symbols here. Okay, I see the bed. I think that's one of the Falconies. So interesting how one of the bedposts is in the Virgo section, which I know in Asterian astrology there's a nakshatra called Hymenaeus, which cusps Virgo and Leo, which is interesting because we usually hear that cusp as being Chitra and Mars ruled. So just the idea of hymen, penetration, Mars, and that bedpost, and that hand right there, and the Virgo close by. Oh my gosh. The Maga of the Persephone and the Bacchus into the Hymenaeus and the soul of Hasta. And then Vulcan Chitra is... I don't really know what that symbol is though. Is it a fan? What is that? I don't know, guys. The Uranus for Virgo in the 11th house, which is interesting because everything we've been saying about Homo Solaris, she is Isis, Lucifer, Castrati, Monosaurus, Cornucopias, virgins, mermaids. It's very Uranus appropriate somehow. And then the 12th house, interesting, we have Venus, and we have here what appears to be like a wheel and spoke. Is that Vishaka? Isn't Vishaka the split branch? Swati is here denoted by something that looks to be like roots, which is interesting because we think of Mula as the root, which is like in a whole different sync. It's not even like intellectually like connected, but I just thought of the creators of the Matrix who have the Swati ascendant or moon as per Nati, which is interesting because she did mention that the transgender notion is a very Swati thing, and when we think of this split Blavatsky mentioned, it just takes a whole different tone as to like what the true purpose behind certain things and agendas are when we hear it like culminate in a term like medical castration or just like bad food, bad lifestyle, all of these things. Like so many people struggle getting pregnant these days, struggle to conceive. Men's sperm count are dropping. It's just like it's so much. But yeah, those roots, and like those roots look like those very tiny roots, you know, the ones that absorb the water, like those fine little hair-like roots. That, you know, extends from the more fixed root, like in Afrikaans we call it a penwortel, which is interesting. It's like the penile notion of that also. And everything we mentioned about Venus and masculinity through the notion of semen and what happens when those processes are cut from the natural homeostasis of a balanced production of the self. So, yeah, like what wheel of time does that flower into an anuradha under an umbrella of a a stag? Oh my gosh. So yeah, what do you guys think? Comment down below. I think I see the it's so interesting. I like the Punarvasu is like the bow, and then in when did I see that arrow? And then Pluto, Capricorn, Shravana is the arrow. Punarvasu is the bow. That's Artemis. Shravana is Apollo. Would you look at that? The galactic center and anti-center still yokes as a golden and a silver key.